Good evening, viewers. Welcome all to the third episode of our new series this year, which is entitled Being Well and Wellbeing, brought to you jointly by Proho.in and Nuva L&T LLP. And our guest today is Abhijit Bhaduri. Although he needs absolutely no introduction, let me put in a few words. He's had an illustrious career that has spanned over 3 decades, and he has previously served as the CHRO at Microsoft India, also the Chief Learning Officer at Wipro. Abhijit is one of the biggest names, really, when it comes to influencers and thought leaders in the HR domain. He happens to be an executive coach, or to put it more succinctly, he's a leadership and personal branding coach. He's a columnist. He contributes to a wide array, amazing array of publications. He's a very well-known author with several best-selling books to his credit. And his latest book, Dreamers and Unicorns, was published late last year to astounding success. Abhijit, very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Avik. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Abhijit, let's start with something that you shared with me just around a week ago. And in that blog, in one of your daily blogs, which I'm now subscribed to, you talked about reinvention. Now, this particular word is being touted quite often and increasingly so in different kinds of milieus. And the word reinvention seems to have somewhat of an elitist sort of tinge to it. I mean, you have tycoons who say, yes, I did this and I wasn't getting anywhere and I hit a rut and then I reinvented my life and I came back and etc. Right? And people who make news or people who come on TV. But in the way that you understand and you view reinvention, is it really the reserve of those chosen few, those celebrities, or is it absolutely essential to everyone to be successful in their careers?
Right. Great question. I think, when you look at reinvention, it's a continuum, so that you can reinvent from just being something marginally different, in which case it's not even sometimes visible to another person outside. They might think that it's different because the change could be inside you. The second could be that, it could be a change in the way that you're working towards a goal, and therefore you reinvent different parts of your daily system and routine, and you could sort of do that. The third is when it is so dramatic that, the world outside can completely recognize it as something different, completely. So that's a leap of some sorts. That is probably what most people sort of think about as reinvention. But in today's day and age, given the fact that organizations barely survive 10 to 11 years, and your skills, whatever has gotten you into that particular role, the skills have a half-life of about 2.5 years, depending on which way you sort of look at it. And human beings are living much longer because of just the juxtaposition of these three things. Reinvention becomes something that everyone has to do, whether you like it or not. The pandemic has just shrunk the timeline within which we have to do it, but it's something that it's not a choice anymore. We have to do it because whether you look at a skill, that's not going to last you 2.5 3 years. So the degrees that you come into the workforce with becomes obsolete in a span of time. Yeah. So for multiple reasons, it is something that all of us are doing. We perhaps don't use the word until we pause and think about it. So yes, all of us have to do it.
So Abhijit, you talked about half-life. Would it be accurate to say that there've always been a half-life of skills, but if 20 years back, a half-life of a skill was, I'm just saying, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, that itself has shrunk today?
It has. A lot of it has to do with the fact that, if you see the way, if you look at the Fortune 500 companies list, or even in India, when you look at the 10 biggest, periodically newspapers publish those. If you see the list, which was there even 5 years, 10 years back, you will see a completely different set of lists, different set of companies on the list.
Yes.
So it is something which is going to happen because business, unless they reinvent their, business models, they're going to sort of disappear. And in every field, whether you want to reinvent yourself or not, the world outside, I mean, so therefore, in my book, Dreamers and Unicorns, I talk about incumbents. Many of these incumbents were at some point of time, very large corporations, very successful corporations, very aspirational. Today, they cannot attract anyone to go and work there because they are a has-been. And
Mhm.
until you really actively have a plan to reinvent yourself, you're probably more likely than not to become a has-been. You become irrelevant. So let's say a bank which is there, if it doesn't reinvent itself, it becomes a has-been because the fintech sector, somebody or the other is doing something completely different. And today, if you see the number of fintech startups which are there, they're operating with the unbanked population. Those who
Mhm.
cannot, give who are not going to be given a loan, let's say of 5,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees. It just is not feasible for a large bank to do it because of their costs. The fintech startups are actually addressing that. So whether you want to or not, and once that market becomes large, they will dislodge the others. I mean, that's Clay Christensen's classic example of
Disruption model. Yes, exactly. So from reinvention, right? Let's roll this up. If you take a broader view at careers per se, right? And it's not that. I mean, if you go back a generation, if I look at my father's generation, which is and you would have seen this as well amongst the elderly people, is that they would have had one domain, relatively one particular role, and their entire career, which would have spanned about 35 to 40 years till the age of retirement, would have been spent in one, two, maximum three companies. That was the kind of trajectory, right? Now, in our times, we definitely have come to know about, let's say, career shifts or career changes, where
Right.
it's a one-time kind of a thing. So you have, let's say, an advertising professional who becomes a very noted, very famous filmmaker, right? And we have instances of that. Or you have bankers who become renowned authors. Even the odd management consultant turns an author. But that is more of a one-time switch. You were A, you become B, you morph into B. However, you have a very interesting formulation that you call Career 3.0, where you're saying it's not A becoming B, it's A and B and C others almost sort of existing as separate subplots in a novel, right? Like something like that, with the ability to harness revenue generation opportunities or earning opportunities for each of these channels. Explain that framework to us and how it
Super.
works.
Yeah. So, one way to sort of really start thinking about it is, the model that you described about your father's generation. People started in one particular end of the spectrum. Think about your career like a tunnel. So you kind of go through that tunnel and you emerge at the time of retirement. Yeah. So the concept of retirement so it's a time marker. Two ends of that spectrum are defined. That was career 1.0. And most often you would see that somebody who's getting into that particular career, if you are an engineer, you remain an engineer until you emerge from the other end of the tunnel. Then you actually saw, around the area of liberalization, you actually started to see more and more of what I define as career 2.0. Career 2.0 is when you have, a degree in something, but you actually land up, starting to do something completely different. So you have a scenario where, as you described, an advertising professional who goes into filmmaking. Now that's in some sense a sort of an adjacency
Yes,
shift.
yes.
But you
There,
also
there
have
are parallels,
people,
overlaps.
correct. But you also do have a scenario where there can be a scenario where, let's say, there's somebody who's a management consultant who's trained to be that, actually becomes a musician and earns their living through that. There are stand-up comedians that you and I know who are at one point of time. I mean, and let's take examples. Papa CJ, who is a stand-up comedian, was actually he's an MBA from Oxford. He's gone on to do some, he did consulting for a bit, and now earns his living as an author and a stand-up comedian. Or you have Atul Khatri, who's doing that.
Or
You have
Anubhav Pal, who was a journalist and has become a stand-up comic and author. Yeah.
there are many such examples. Now, if I were to sort of look at the kind of work that I do, for example, I have, one set of work that I do, which is with the corporate world, where I work with people in terms of leadership, talent, and culture, and I'm a consultant and a strategic advisor in that. That's one kind of a revenue stream. So I work with the larger corporations, and I have a certain kind of a rate at which I get paid. The second income stream is where I work, let us say, as a advisor, as a brand evangelist for large corporations, and I get paid at a different rate, and I'm doing both on the same day. Then
Mm-hmm.
there's a third sort of a stream which is there, which is I host shows and I kind of do work in that space, and I write and I draw. All of that actually provides another income stream, but at a different rate of pay. Now, all three, sometimes on the same day, I'm working with people who are competitors in one sense or the other. But that is the way that you are building a portfolio of companies, your portfolio of clients, your portfolio of skills, and a portfolio of monetizing opportunities. That is Career 3.0. And you will start to see that in the world that we are living in. As I said, that you are going to see a very large number of freelancers coming in. Freelancers will necessarily start to move in that direction, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So it will happen.
Mm-hmm. And within that, I was just thinking, trying to process it while you were saying, is there sometimes a kind of a trade-off? So I'll give you an example. So let's say you're writing for HBR Ascent or you're writing for ET. Now, you and I know that there may be times where they request you to make that pro bono, the writing part, or there will be times that there will be an honorarium. But the honorarium is nowhere near the market fee that you
Sure.
would charge, right? But the visibility, the impact, the outreach of that is tremendous. Tens of thousands of people are reading it, discussing it, debating it, starting their own discussion threads and so forth. As opposed to that, you sit with a CXO panel of 3 to 5 people. So the impact is just at that level, not even at the company level in the first instance, right? But your fee is that much higher. And whenever you have these different income streams, what one might do or one should be able to do in 3.0 is look at both of these and say, okay, which is more important to me at that point of time? And therefore I would devote that much more time to that particular stream.
Yeah, Avik, yes and no. I mean, I don't think they are mutually exclusive, and the reason why I say that is because you understand that as freelancers, one of the greatest places where large corporations really large sort of bodies which can give you prominence. One of the ways in which the freelancers get exploited a lot is that they say that we will provide you this kind of exposure, but you got to do it pro bono. Yeah, which is in my view. You don't go to a doctor and ever say that I'm going to go and talk about your work to all my friends, and every time they are sick I'm going to tell them to come to you. You
Mhm,
don't
mhm.
really do that, but that's because we are yet to understand the world of freelancing. We still understand, and all the people who expect you to do things for free are the people who are employed, because for them they kind of say that, yeah, if tomorrow somebody were to call me to do something like that, I would go and do that for free. You do have an income stream, therefore you can afford to do that.
Mhm, mhm.
Sometimes a freelancer, this is what they do for a living. You cannot expect them to do that for free. You don't go
Right.
to a I have friends who are music composers. I'll never go and say that, why don't you compose some music for me for free?
Or for free.
That's the profession that the person has, so you have to respect that. Having said that, I think you can always decide where in the continuum you are getting value. Sometimes you might think that, yeah, this is something I would do pro bono. I would give my work for free to somebody who is going to take it to a audience where I think I would like my work to reach. Yes, absolutely, I'm going to do it. Sometimes you do it for strategic reasons. Sometimes you do it, because there is no option. There can be variety of things, but you have to. I think when you're looking at that free versus paid work, you are still thinking like Career 2.0 or Career 1.0, because you're looking at it as a sort of a. You have to look at multiple streams, some which pay nothing, some which pay a little, some which pay more, some
Yeah.
which pay a lot. So when you do that, then
Mhm.
you are less upset about having to do something free, because then you know why you're doing what you're doing. So
Right.
you have to look at it as a
As a
portfolio,
whole, as a composite whole.
as a portfolio of payments,
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
a portfolio
Absolutely.
of clients, a portfolio of skills, and each one will be monetized in a different way.
Right. Um, So, with this context in mind, right, let's just have Rahul's question, which was posed just a minute ago. Yeah, I'm going to extend this. So, he's asking that how have the dynamics of the workplace changed after the pandemic? Let me extend this, right?
Sure, sure.
How have the dynamics of work, the workforce, and the workplace, evolved, or how is it evolving in the
Yeah.
wake of the pandemic?
So, if you sort of see that worker, and workforce will always be in the form of an equilibrium. I mean, so in my book Dreamers and Unicorns, I talk about the fact that if you look at when there is the industrial revolution, people move from the farmland into the factories, and
Mhm.
therefore the kind of skills that worked in the agricultural sector don't work in the factories. You actually have a fresh set of skills. So work changes because making cars is very different from growing corn. So work changes, that needs a different kind of a workforce, and that in turn leads to the creation of a different workplace. So the factory is a different workplace than the farm.
Mhm.
If you look at what has happened in the pandemic, if I'm just sort of jumping through all the other stages in between, the workplace has actually disappeared. So it has become virtual. So if you really look at it, there was a point of time where a lot of the, in if you look at the example of computerization, there was what was called on-prem machines. So you would have people who would run the computer servers and everything on your land and factory building or office building. They would run that. It was called on-prem, or short for on-premise. Then we had a scenario which is then it moved to the cloud. So the work actually was being done. For example, when you send something through Gmail, you're not sending it to your own laptop. You're actually sending it to a place in the cloud. So it's the same thing that has happened. Work moved to the cloud. Now in the pandemic, the workforce has also moved to the cloud because talent can now be accessed from anywhere, and which is what enables the organizations to shift the workplace from the office into somebody's home. So, in that sense, even the workplace has moved to the cloud. So, right now, that equilibrium has been restored. Workforce, and workplace, all three of them have moved to the cloud. So, it's no longer on prem. The question I would hypothesize is that when we, have, assuming we are going to have the vaccine, given to all the people,
Mhm.
at that point of time, would we voluntarily go back to the old model? Would we stick to a hybrid? I would put my money on the fact that it would be a hybrid model. Again, it would not be that some companies will have everybody on prem, and some companies will allow people to work remotely.
Yes.
What is likely to happen is, within that you will see a continuum of work will be on a continuum, workforce will be on a continuum, and the workplace will be on a continuum, which could mean Mondays and Wednesdays I go into the work office and I work with my team, which also everybody else comes in, and we do a certain kind of work there, which is the on-prem work.
Mhm.
And then there is going to be potentially another thing which we do collectively, but we do it through let's say a meeting or a StreamYard thing like this. Or the third matter that we do is we do our own work and we submit it in some common place, which could be a shared document, a shared drive, or anything. So we will probably see hybridization of worker, and workplace, as we go forward, even after the vaccine.
And is it not the case that even within a company, depending on the vertical, the amount or the proportion that they would coming on prem would be different? So, for example, if it's, let's say, an IT service from, let's say we're talking about Wipro or a company like that, there are all of these client servicing people, right? So front ending consultants and architects and programmers and so forth. So their proportion of on prem or on cam or on screen would be markedly different from, let's say, the finance team or the backend team which is handling the database and the infrastructure, even within the same company.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at it, there was some pieces of work which remained on-prem even during the pandemic. So,
Yes.
let's say somebody who's manufacturing something, pharmaceuticals, they did not shut down. Anybody who's in essential services, the doctors had to perform surgery actually in the hospital.
Yes.
But telemedicine grew. It is actually the moment in the workplace, which is what, when ebooks were introduced, a lot of people said that, ebooks will never work because, look at it like this is so different because I enjoy the look and feel of this. True, but imagine the amount of work is not just ebooks, but think of the amount of reading that you do in a book today versus what you do, say, on your phone. And if you look at that, that has dramatically changed. I mean, you people practically don't read, the physical books. When you want to look at the act of reading a storybook or something, I still like to read fiction in the form of a paperback. But
Totally
all
agree.
my
That's
business book
absolutely
and everything, in my mind, that is something, it's far more efficient because I'm just sort of, reading vertically. I switch up with my thumb and I'm reading. But
true.
there are things which I read horizontally, which is fiction. So I, depending on the kind of stuff that I'm doing, we are sort of looking at those in different formats. So work has also gone through that ebook phase where we are beginning to do a lot of our work through the mobile. Look at the amount of work that gets done on WhatsApp. Look at the amount of work that gets done on voice. Look at the amount of work that's getting done on the screen. And then look at the amount of work that is going to actually demand drawing. So yeah, I like to draw, on a piece of paper, but I also draw on my, device. So I do both. I
Hmm.
don't think one. It's one of the five shifts I talk about in my book Dreamers and Unicorns is that you have to understand polarities will exist. You can't do online or offline. You have to do both. You can't say employees or freelancers. You have to do both. So I think it's the same model which is going to continue even in the workplace.
And just an adjunct question to that again, Abhijit, because a lot of people are asking this, is
Yes.
we talked about freelancers, we talked about the gig economy. Is that really going to be hastened in the wake of the pandemic? Are more and more companies going to say, yes, we want people, we don't want full-time employees, and we want people to just sort of come in and go, and they don't even have to come in physically. They can just be on a call like this.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, brilliant question. A couple of data points. I mean, already, I think if you look at, India, India is the third largest, setup in the world as far as freelancers and gig workers are concerned. The distinction I'm making between gig workers and freelancers is, in gig workers, there are plenty of platforms where you sign on to the platform and the platform allocates work. It has all happened if you think about the Ola Uber model. It is in the case of white collar work also similar kind of platforms exist where they allocate the work to you. Fiverr, TapChief, this, that. I mean, there are many of them. Urban Clap, many of them which do that kind
Yes.
of work. You also then have a scenario where you have freelancers who are actually doing the work by themselves. There are a whole lot of people. So, for example, historically, doctors don't go to you through an app. You either see them in the hospital, or there are private practitioners who you go to directly, in the neighborhood earlier. So you used to have the house physician earlier, but now you have the clinics where you go and see the doctor. Then you have the multi-specialty hospitals where you go and see them there. And then, there are other, so telemedicine is also thriving. So if you look at any of these things, it is a range of activities which has come up, which is actually going to be there, all the time.
Right, exactly. I'm going to change the focus to go back and discuss some of the tenets in your book, Dreamers and Unicorns. I mean, it's a fantastic title. It's a catchy title, but those of us who've read the book cover to cover know that in terms of a story, in terms of the evolution of people who really make it big, it's actually half the story. So there's dreamers, there's unicorns, then they become market shapers, and finally they turn out to be incumbents, right? Explain to us this entire evolution.
Sure. So what I kind of, in the as I was doing in the last 4 or 5 years, when I look at my consulting work, I kind of found that a lot of people understand things like having a product market fit. When you start a company, they understand that I have to have a market which is going to buy the product or service that I'm making. People understand that. People also understand that I have to hire people. I have to, do finance, manage all of that. They understand that. What they do not understand or pay adequate amount of attention to is all the softer elements like leadership, talent, and culture. So in the book, what I have done is I've talked about the importance of leadership, talent, and culture becoming the growth drivers. Because when you look at what turns a dreamer, which is any startup, into a unicorn. By unicorn, I don't necessarily mean $1 billion valuation, but I'm saying that you could have a company which is got national presence. The footfalls are nationally there. Chances are that in growing to that kind of a scale, it becomes $1 billion valuation. But in India, there are plenty of examples of companies which do have a very, very large amount of presence in many towns and cities, but they don't necessarily have that $1 billion valuation. So I'm still going to call them unicorns. When a unicorn becomes so if thousands and thousands of dreamers have to sort of give way to maybe a handful of unicorns. In the same way, thousands of unicorns give way to one or two market shapers. So if you look at that market shaper curve, it's again, you are global, you've got a great presence. One of the first yardsticks for that is that people want to work for you. Talent is the first indication that you've become a market shaper, because people are dying to work with you. And if you take any of the bigger companies which are there, the largest company, they release an ad, and even if they don't specify what the job is, how much they are paying, people will still blindly apply for it. That's the
Yes.
power of the employer brand. A incumbent, when you look at an incumbent, one of the things that happens is many a times, and India is a good example. You think of many of the large families at one point of time, these business houses were very aspirational. You wanted to get a job with those, and so many of them have become completely irrelevant now, because the business model is gone. They've not done the succession planning. They don't have leaders who can carry off the business into the new world.
Right.
Culture of that place has remained a very family driven kind of a thing, which does not attract the true professionals. And they remain, and also ran for a long time, they remain in that zone, and then they become irrelevant. So I'm saying that the movement from where people want to, you start losing right talent, is probably the first indication, a warning bell, that if you don't address leadership, talent, and culture, and all three of them also move together, you are potentially going to become irrelevant and become an incumbent, no matter where you are. I mean, so a unicorn also could become, an incumbent, because some people just don't invest in growing the brand, growing the leadership, growing the culture of the place, and they will become irrelevant. So they will become incumbents. So at any stage, it is possible.
And that's probably because when they were unicorns, or even earlier when they were dreamers, right, there was an exploratory phase. While once they are met with success, and then waves after wave of success, I think with every wave, it's a vindication of whatever I am doing is right, is true, is the best, right? It becomes like the best practice, whatever I'm doing. And
Totally.
beyond a time, then it becomes solidified. If what I'm doing is the best practice, and if that is the best, and I can't, get to a Pareto superior state than that, then why do I need to change?
Yeah, it also happens with individuals. I mean,
Yes.
it happens. Let's take the example of people in the performing arts. You do a particular movie, let's say, and it becomes a hit. Then
Yes.
the next 5 movies that you do is basically a
It's
repeat.
exactly the same characterization.
Same characteristic, you are called something different, and there comes a point of time when you
Same
stop.
mannerisms, same voice modulation, same look, and you
Exactly.
become typecast. And beyond a point, it's like, oh, come on, I can't watch him anymore. He's boring.
Exactly. So the person is the last one who realizes that in doing a repeat of this, it is
He's
good
made himself irrelevant. Hmm.
you are moving towards irrelevance. And one of the
Yes.
things, I think, if you think about it, in my head, what is the sign of that irrelevance in performing arts specifically? I would say the day people start to mimic you, you have a lot of people who can mimic actors.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think if you can be mimicked, it's a warning sign that you're probably you need to think about doing something completely different and take a risk. And success kills your risk taking ability. When you
Yes.
fail, you have no problems, because you
Because you
flunk.
just, fail forward, fail better, fail again, right?
Totally, totally. Yeah. But if you are successful, you want to say, okay, one more movie like this and then I'll do the rest. That also becomes successful. Now you're completely convinced.
Then you're
But when
hooked. Then
things
you're
start
hooked.
dying, and you kind of say, no, this movie didn't do well because I think the script was poor. Then this actor who was with me
The
was not there.
co-star was, yes.
The co-star was terrible. The music was horrible. They didn't release in the right places. You never turn back and say, I am becoming irrelevant.
Exactly.
And so those people just disappear. So I think that's really the tragedy that one has seen happening with so many people.
So many talented people, really, really talented people that one
Yeah,
can.
it happens in every field. I mean, sports, it happens like that. I mean, you're sort
Yes,
of doing the same things until you become irrelevant.
yes,
Writers, you're writing the same kind of novel every time, and you know
yes,
what is going to happen. So people, the moment people can mimic, that means there's a
yes.
pattern somebody picks up, and that's a warning sign. So if I'm an actor, I certainly would think of that.
Indeed, or an author. We've come up to the midpoint.
Yes.
Exactly. What an engrossing conversation this has been thus far, Abhijit. We'll take a very quick break, viewers, and then back after a minute. Welcome back, viewers. You are watching the third episode of Being Well and Wellbeing, and our guest today is Abhijit Bhaduri. Abhijit, let's talk about this is something that you alluded to earlier in the program when you talked about the entire evolution from the days of the Industrial Revolution in terms of technology, in terms of the skills needed, etc. And I want to make a comparison. We don't even have to go back to the 1780s, but if you just talk about the last 30 years, right, or a little bit more, the advent of the first TV, or the advent of the first color TV, the advent of the first desktops from an industrial office purpose, the first desktops that we started to use at home, to today, it's I think progress or advancement from a technological standpoint at a flabbergasting speed, right?
Sure.
And where we are today in terms of IoT and digital and machine learning and AI and all of those capabilities. But as opposed to that, if we look at the style of leadership or the style of management, that for many, I'm making a sweeping generalization here, but for a large majority of companies in India and abroad, it's still the old industrial revolution based assembly line, command and control, didactic, style of management and leadership.
Totally.
And there's a marked contrast that I feel between these two. They're trying to coexist, but it's a very unequal and uneasy alliance. I mean, what's your comment on that?
So first of all, fully agree, and I think that when you look at these three styles, a leadership style, the leadership brand. Let's sort of look at the promise of the leadership brand,
Mm-hmm.
the talent brand, and the culture brand. These three go together. So, for example, in the book, I talk about the fact that the first thing is that the leader sets the vision. What kind of things are we aspiring to do? So they can talk about the fact that we are aspiring to build a global organization. If you have a global organization, you cannot build a global organization if your workforce is not diverse enough. That everybody in your leadership team looks the same, is of the same gender. Then that's the first problem area. And I think it starts very early. That in the early days, if you don't start to build comfort in working with many different people, you are likely to be the reason why the organization doesn't grow. Being able to and a lot of people spend disproportionate amount of mind space looking at how to build hard skills, but they don't necessarily spend that much of time and energy building soft skills. And the reason is soft skills take much longer to build. So for example, if you say learning to manage people, I may have managed people for the last whatever 10, 20 years, but have I improved on the way that I manage people? Or so many times when I've had the opportunity to work with leaders across many different kinds of organizations, and whether they are CEOs or people at early stage of their career, most people have never thought about changing the way that they work. I mean, I'll give you a good, quick example, actual example. And the person, I was coaching, turned back and said that my belief is I give the people the work and then they do it. I said, but then, and the person doesn't participate in meetings, he doesn't go for meetings and all that. I said, then why do you exist as a team leader? What is your role? He says, no, but I've seen my boss never used to do this. And I said, that may have been true and when was this the case, by the way? So he says, oh, I joined the workforce in 1987. I said, just do the math. So 1987 was how many years back? I said, no, but after that also, I said, well, I don't know. Has it happened in the last 15 or 20 years when you've been in that space? So he says, no, I go with that. That means you are working, you change your phone every, 3 or 5 years, but you don't change your leadership style in 20
Like
years.
ever. Yes.
Yeah. So it is really like that. You have to think about your leadership style has to change the way that people think about their phones. As often as you are doing that, you should be able to work with many different kinds of people. The second thing is, being comfortable with feedback. I think one of the largest reasons why people don't improve and change is because we only like to work with people who tell you that you are amazing, you're fantastic, you're very good. Authors who become irrelevant are the ones who are just building a cocoon of people who say your writing is amazing, you're damn good. That's a dangerous sign. If that's the only thing that you're hearing, there's something wrong in the people that you are asking that question, because human beings have opinions, and chances are that they don't feel comfortable giving you that feedback that this thing is not right. um, and many a times when you tell the younger people, especially those who are early stages in their career, they have not been conditioned to fear authority. They will tell you to your face that I
Yes.
think this is very boring, what you said is very boring, or you're the only one who speaks in the meeting. I've seen so many young people give that brutal feedback, but I've also seen the more established leader sidelining that person and eventually getting rid of that person. That is, of course, tragic for the young person to experience that. So I think for the young person, I would say figure out a way to say the same thing without offending. You can be truthful without being offensive. That is the
Yes.
skill. You can give feedback that your work is terrible without using that phrase. You can inspire people. And we've seen, in school,
Of
teachers,
course. Mhm.
somebody who gave you the least amount of marks, but you always felt like working harder to improve. That is the style I think that works. When you inspire people to be better, that takes a lot of time and a lot of feedback. So if you are going to be sensitive about, why did this person say that's not good? Oh, that person is always picking faults. Well, I'm sorry, you're not meant to be a leader then. You are
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
leadership material. The first thing about being a leader is to be very comfortable taking feedback which is not necessarily complimentary. Whoever doesn't do that is not leadership material. They may have reached a position of leadership, they will soon be dismantled or they become irrelevant.
Irrelevant in due course of time. Exactly. Talking about leadership styles, right, takes us to leadership traits, and of course,
Yes.
it has become quite the mode, right? Quite fashionable in the last few months. Everybody's talking about in 2021, this is what you should be doing, right, etc. So one of the things that I've noticed that you've done in your book, Dreamers and Unicorns, is that you have drawn from the work, you've quoted the work of the German psychologist Eric Erikson and his entire slew of attributes. So you're looking at altruism, it could be autonomy, wisdom, trust, and so forth, right? But then you hone in on that one factor, which is trust, and you say trust is absolutely critical, and that is where the entire work has to begin. Tell us why this is so critical and what happens in an organization where there is a trust deficit.
Um, I think if I will say that if there is one thing that I would like people to sort of focus on is that one big takeaway, because we are in that phase where the world of work is being sort of once again reimagined, yeah,
Mhm.
and the changes that are happening. It's sometimes it's like when you have a teenager at home and the kid, somebody who comes in to visit you says, "Oh my God, I mean, you're looking so tall." Uh, but you have probably not noticed that shift. The world of work is like that teenager now. It is going to move rapidly, it's going to grow up, and you have to learn to look at it. One of the ways to think about it is when anything begins, the first experience of an emotion is trust. So, for example, when a baby is born, in the 0 to 6 month kind of a phase, and some say 0 to 12 months, the baby forms a view of trust. Can I trust people? Can I not trust people? And between these two extremes of trust versus mistrust,
Mhm.
people decide to take a position which could be somewhere, at either end, that I trust people, or the other end, that I mistrust people, or somewhere in between. You might say, okay, I kind of, I think I largely trust people, except that some I don't trust. Yeah. What happens is this starts to show in your leadership style over the years. And so, yes, a lot of people talk to you about, doing this particular competency, that, of that. Trust is so internal to you that you have to understand, why do I not trust people? And do I over trust people? Both are bad. Yeah. So I'm not saying that you have to trust everyone, because there are people who are going to betray your trust. Being able to
Yes.
understand that, but largely to be able to trust people. Otherwise, you can neither develop people, nor can you work with people. You will start micromanaging. So if you're micromanaging, chances are
Mhm.
that you have a trust problem. When you look at that whole element, whether you are an organization where, let's say, you are a startup, what is the first challenge that you work with? That people have to trust the product that I am putting to the market. Consumers have to trust me, that I'm giving them value for money. Employees
Yes.
have to trust me that if they work with me, I'm not going to let them down and one fine day get rid of them. The financiers who are sort of venture capitalists have to trust me that the plan that I'm saying is actually going to happen.
Mhm.
Even now, think about it. I mean, we've got vaccines. The reason why people are taking it around the world or not taking it is because of the trust factor. So look at
Yes.
the questions we will ask: which vaccine is this? Who has taken it? What is the
What's the efficacy report that's come out? Where has this been published?
yeah.
Etc. 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 Right? Yeah.
And when people say this is 70%, this is 80%, what are you going to choose? You will choose 80%, not knowing the qualitative breakup of that 70 versus 80.
Versus 80. Exactly.
I might have had four people, and out of which, I have got my 80% number,
And
and
here they might have done it for 30,000 people, right? And it's
30,000 people, 3 million people, and got
right.
70,000. But, so it's a question of trust. When you go
Mhm.
somewhere, if you get a job in a place where you trust the brand, your cost of hire is dramatically lower, because then you don't need to pay you don't need to pay money in order to be able to get your top talent wants to work with you, so it works the other way around.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
think it is those kind of situations that I think that are really important for people to really start working on. How do I learn to trust people and be trusted? It has to work both ways. It's not good enough only that I trust, others also have to trust me.
Exactly. One of the things that you talked about, again, reinvention or reimagining, if we go back to that and sort of draw the circle full before taking questions from the audience, um, for any kind of a reinvention, and this is something that you talk about as well in your book, when you're saying there are different aspects of organizational growth, but there's growth along the human dimension, which is completely different from technological growth or whatever SOPs I have, or whether I have the latest and the greatest ERP at the back end running all my operations, etc. Right? Because by definition, any growth um, along the human dimension, the work is intrinsic, the work is internal, right? And that leads to the question of evaluation of not just self-awareness, but understanding exactly and objectively where I am. So how do I reinvent or how do I change my way of working if I don't know exactly where I stand? And in this particular context, right, what do you think is the role of psychometric instruments? Because you've been working with, Hogan and other instruments for a long time. Do they have a renewed valency, in this kind of a scenario and going forward?
Um, Absolutely phenomenal question, Avik. I think I'm going to sort of step back and say that, for anything that we need to measure, you need the appropriate instrument. Yeah. So, for example, and I wrote an article which is that who assesses the SSE, the assessment instrument. Yeah. So think about it. If today I said I'm going to measure your temperature in liters. Yeah. Now, liters is a valid measure, but not for temperature. Yeah. But I tell you that, I've got a phenomenal, method. I can measure your temperature in liters. You will obviously question me and say, how do you know that? Where did you find that? You will assess, you will discover whether there is a scientific basis. And if
For it.
the answer is no, you will discount that. Unfortunately, what happens is when it comes to psychometric instruments, the people who are recommending those psychometric instruments very often have very limited first-hand awareness of whether that instrument is valid. Does it have reliability? Does it have validity? Which means I may have a thermometer which measures in the right unit, but the thermometer may be faulty. That when I take the temperature, in two consecutive readings, there's a wide fluctuation. So then I know that there's something wrong. Or you kind of say that if I got another 5 thermometers and measured, they all say that I've got 100-degree temperature. In another case, this one tells me that I've got 93-degree temperature. Again, a warning bell that it might be wrong. When it comes to psychometric, unfortunately, people use the market numbers. So if I tell you that, I have this particular instrument is being bought by so and so company, and I give the name of a company that I know you trust, a lot of people will say that, if those guys are using it, it must be right.
It must be right. It should be good for my company, for me as well. It should
be good for my company, yeah. So if I say, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, there's that, Tesla, everyone is using it, you will say, okay, these guys they have obviously got a bunch of people. They could have got anyone. They have done this.
They've got him. Yes.
May not be. So the important thing to understand is personality plays a tremendous role in success and failure in our career choice. For example, if you personality in the right place, is what creates success. So it is something that needs to find the right spot. The flower that grows in the desert is different from the flower that grows in, let's say, the soil in the city that you live in. Personality actually is that fit with the role. So you cannot have, there is no trait which is universally desirable. Let me give you one example and then I'll sort of pause for your question. For example, we very often will say, he's a very creative person. So we think that creativity by and large is a very good idea to have. And yeah, maybe, but in every job, creativity is not good. Especially in some jobs, it can be a real challenge. For example, if the person who's frisking you for security at the airport or some cinema hall, wherever they are frisking you, if the person says that, I think Avik looks like a person who is very respectable, I don't think I need to frisk him. And since Abhijit is working with Avik, I don't think I need to frisk him either.
So we just let these two gentlemen pass.
And I may be the wrong guy, So in that kind of a place, taking initiative, using creative judgments that, somebody who looks like this cannot be a bad person. Those kind of judgments very often, and I have seen loads and loads of people who make that error. They will say that, I can talk to a person and make out whether that person is the right fit for my organization. Absolute rubbish.
Exactly.
This is biggest myth. We are very, very poor about, making our bets on people, because it's a very complicated thing. We cannot predict what we will feel tomorrow morning about the job.
Yes.
Today I joined the job, I'm most excited about it. Why is it that we decide to quit? I have quit so many jobs. So did I make the wrong judgment about the job? Maybe. And maybe that the job changes and the company changes and my life changes, when I need to change. So personality in the right place is the reason for success. Measuring it in the right way is vital for career success, which means if I don't know what is my strength, if I'm not a detail oriented person, which is one of the reasons as a HR director, I always used to invest in having a really phenomenally good comp and benefit person, because I'm not numerically very good. I'm not good in it.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
I would work with a compensation expert who is really good at it. Now, if I get, say, I'm the HR director, I must be really good at it. Otherwise, how would I have become the HR director? I would make grievous mistakes. So, knowing what you are good and not good at and being comfortable with that. I'm probably better than somebody in some respects, and like anybody else in all respects, and like nobody else in some respects.
Mhm, mhm.
So, it is that continuum. Measurement is vital, as personality assessment is vital. Also working with a person who is a coach who can help you, sort of work on that. I mean, it's a very important element. So there's so many people that you and I work with. That whole work is vital because not everybody can make those choices. So having a career coach is also equally important.
Mhm.
Very long answer I gave, shows I got a little carried away. I'm so sorry about
No,
it.
but
But
this is close to your heart and close to my heart equally. So, thanks for that, Abhijit. We've got a number of questions from the members of the audience who are watching in, and I'm going to
yes,
take them in quick succession, as many
yes,
of them as time permit. We'll start off with Arnab's question. Okay.
yes.
And I'll just read it out while it's coming up. Do you think the corporate leaders across India have responded correctly, properly, appropriately to the changed circumstances? I won't even call it the new normal, but whatever it is that we're going through. Are
Yeah.
you by and large satisfied with the way that they have tried to reinvent workplace and workforce?
So I think it's a continuum. It is not going to be, it's a little bit like saying, what are the trends for 2021? Nothing. I mean, I'm personally very skeptical about this, even though many of the publications will insist that I at least talk about one particular trend or the other. One thing to keep in mind is you have to understand that many of these things are work in progress. So it will emerge over a span of time. I think when the pandemic hit, most companies did a great job of responding in the immediate, telling people you work from home, getting the laptops, desktops there. I mean, many of those things happened. I think the workplace is still evolving. So it is hard to say that, the people have done a good job. Done a good job can be measured only when you reach a finishing line. In the
Yes.
workplace, there is no finishing line. So it is something we'll have to watch. So various companies are at different stages of evolution in the marketplace, in the kind of people, in the leadership. This combination, what works for a dreamer doesn't necessarily work for a market shaper.
Mhm.
So hard to give a one response that fits all four categories.
Right. Exactly. We'll take up Oritro's question next, and this is mainly around employee engagement,
Yes.
because in the old normal, in the pre-pandemic scenario, right, where people would be in office, you would have, you'd have office parties or departmental parties or rewards and recognition, and gift certificates and birthdays being celebrated, etc., right? How does that translate into a hybrid kind of a scenario? Because employees will still absolutely have to be engaged. You have to have the rapport and the relationship with the employees.
So I think so. This is something I'm going to sort of take a punt and say something which is against conventional wisdom. I think replicating the processes that work in the physical setting,
Mhm.
replicate those in the virtual setting are juvenile. So I have seen a number of instances where you and I will have a coffee together, and I'm drinking here and you're drinking there. It's a little bit of a childish make believe kind of a thing that we believe both of us are having coffee and enjoying that. It's not. What I would actually think employee engagement in this particular setting should be that you spend the time actually having very deep conversations with the people in your team to figure out what makes them unique. What is their aspiration? What are their things? What are the things that you know about them which is not written on the resume?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the opportunity that this pandemic provides, that you can set up those timepieces and really think about, let's re-examine our work and see what is the best way in which you can do your work better. What can I do to make that happen? So it's a place to take stock, to do research, and to try prototypes of different things that you can then bring to the workplace. It is not the place where you take what worked there and sort of, it's really like saying that when I read a book on on my phone, every
Mm-hmm.
time I kind of sort of try to turn the page by doing that, it's going to make your screen dirty. It's not going to turn the page. So I think it's that world that we have to look at. It's a different world, so it's time to reflect.
Great. We'll take up Shubhajit's question next. All of these are kind of interrelated anyway. The work from
Sorry,
home, right?
a
I
great
mean,
question. I'm very grateful for the questions that you're putting. So Shubhajit, sorry, over to your question. Yes, please,
so
Naveen.
Shubhajit is asking, right? Work from home has been touted, has been celebrated by many. This is the best thing that's happened since apple pie. But there is a less sort of becoming underbelly of that as well, right? And there are murmurings of people getting burnt out and digital fatigue, and also a real sense of disconnect, lack of bonding, alienation creeping in. So in that particular milieu, right, let's assume that the organization, the stakeholders are cognizant of this, and they task HR with saying, "Boss, kuch karna padega," right? What would you recommend? What would you advise that HR person to do or team to
So
do?
I would, burnout happens when you are trying to, and I want to take a minute and just say, a lot of times when this productivity thing, goes over the top, even during the pandemic, I've seen that a number of people have very proudly announced that our productivity has actually gone up and all that. And this is
Yes,
it's a myth, because what is happening is people are working, the hours that they spent in commuting are being spent at work. The hours that
yes.
they spend with their kids, spending time with
Have
their
been segued, have been diverted into work. Yes,
so you're paying people for 8 hours and making them work for 16.
12
Obviously
hours.
productivity
Yes,
will go up a little bit here and there. I just think this is an opportunity to really question that, does work done through the screen require a different set of variables? For example, when you look at, say, schools or online webinars, etc., a number of the webinars are held for the same 3 hours, 4 hours, because somebody says, well, we used to pay this guy x amount of money for a 4 hour workshop. Now we are going to call this guy for a webinar. We are going to pay him the same amount of money, but I'm going to get this guy to speak for 4 hours. The people will die if they spend 4 hours in a webinar, because our human attention is not designed for this method. The
yes.
reason is, when you have 40 different people on and like little tiles out there, the amount that you feel drained is very high. So the burnout rate, if you spend 4 hours, not only will this person who's delivering the webinar experience burnout, the people who are
Who
going
are
through
attending will
the
also experience that. Yes,
burnout.
yes.
So I think burnout is happening because, in a very, very not thought through method, we are translating everything in the same way. If I had 1 hour meetings, with my team, I'm now having 1 hour meeting. Maybe it needs much lesser. And online, their attention spans are much smaller, because when you look at online, our experience of the world online has been television and movies, where every second the frame is changing. Look at how much of change are you seeing other than my waving my hands. What is changing in the screen? Nothing. So it needs to be examined in a very different way. So the number of people, for example, if you are running a workshop, you don't just have one person running a workshop. You need to have 4 or 5 people who manage the engagement of people in smaller groups. That, okay, I'm going to manage 5 people or 20, 10 people. Somebody else will manage that. Somebody will answer the question. Somebody will make sure that the screen changes. Somebody will do this. It's a fairly complex piece we haven't figured out. We have just taken that same model and put it online. That is why people experience burnout. It's a chance to reinvent. So, Shubhajit, thank you very much for that question.
We've come up to stoppage time, but I'm going to take one last question, and then we'll close out. This is from Chandok, who's saying, how can HR or the HR team in any organization, how can they evolve? So this is great, because I think this has put the spotlight on HR, and the traditional grouse of HR saying we're not asked to lead from the front, we don't have the budget, we don't have the resources, we don't have the empowerment. Suddenly they thrust upon that, right? All of that is there. How do they come up to speed? How do they evolve?
So I think, in some senses, I want to take a minute to say that, very often HR gets the brunt of, anything which goes on. A lot of it is because when you have leaders who are gutless, when they promote people, they are the ones who will go and announce to their team members, I got you promoted. When they have
Yes.
to hire people, they pass it on to HR. So HR very often gets the bad rap for leaders who are gutless. So that's the first piece that I want to put on the table. The second thing that I think that what HR should do is to be able to actually, divide the work into multiple different places. All jobs are becoming tech jobs. So to be able to understand HR technology, whether it's analytics, whether it is about, leveraging collaborative workspaces, to redesign, employee research. Before you go for engagement, you must know more about the employee. You don't launch a product with zero consumer research. How do you launch an employee engagement program simply sending balloons to your house on your birthday? It doesn't quite work. You have to research. So investing in research, investing in technology, understanding skills about how do you use the new media which has come up to be able to communicate with people. Engagement is a byproduct. Engagement is not a department or division. So you have to start looking at things which give people those opportunities. So that's the shift that I would think for HR.
Wonderful. I mean, this has been an absolutely fascinating and, to me personally, enriching conversation. Abhijit. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm sure the viewers, everybody who's tuned in, have really had a lot of takeaways from this session. And if you've just happened to have missed it because you've got another appointment or other commitments, it's the weekend. After all, these are recorded, and they'll be remaining on our individual websites and our handles. They'll be there on the YouTube channel. They'll be there on the Facebook page of Prohor. We'll be back with another episode same time next week. Until then, enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.
You wanted to say something, Abhijit?
No. I just wanted to say thank you, for having me here. And, I'm happy to connect with anyone to answer their questions. I'm on LinkedIn. That's my name, or on Twitter. Happy to connect and answer questions which I have missed today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.